Hello, Edu-Magicians. Welcome to the Edu-Magic Podcast with your host, Dr. Sam Fessich. Dr. Sam is a professor of education, author of Edu-Magic, and a pumpkin spice latte fan. This podcast is designed for pre-service teachers. Remember, friends, teaching doesn't begin at graduation, but during that first class at 8 a.m. Let's get this party started.
Hi, I'm Chris Nesi from the House of EdTech Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey Edu-Magicians, it's Sam, and before we start into this episode, I want to share with you about an amazing resource. It's called the Educator Candidate Member Portal. AAEE provides you with resources such as virtual job fairs, a job board, interview tips and prep, resume building, webinars. You can even get a copy of the Job Search Handbook digitally. So head on over to aaee.org and create your free Educator Candidate Member account today. Friends, one more thing before we get started. This episode is brought to you by my new course, Digital Portfolios from Scratch to Interview Ready. Head on over to sfessich.com/courses for more information about this self-paced, hands-on virtual workshop.
Hi, Candace. How are ya?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm great. It's good to see you again.
You too.
Yeah. So today I was just telling everybody what we're going to be chatting about today, 5 common interview questions for teachers and how to approach them.
Awesome.
So shall we jump right in?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. All right. So friends, so today we're going to be discussing 5 different interview questions. Now, they might sound a little bit different depending on your interviewers, but these are common themes that you're going to see throughout your interview. So let's start with the question of something like, when I walk by your classroom, what do I see? Or what does your classroom look like and feel like? Something along those lines.
Okay, so I would go, number one, I would always preface any of these conversations that I have with anyone with, you have to format your answers in a story-like way, because when people are listening to a story, they're automatically more interested. Their engagement is heightened. So you always want to try and tell a story when you're answering these questions. So if I were going to answer this question, what do I see? What would I see when I walk by your class? I would think of like, what does the story of my perfect classroom look like? I would start with the walls. I would then say, what would you see on my walls? Then I would go to, what would my kids be doing? What activities would they be engaged in? Would they be talking? Would they be using technology? Would they be working in groups? Are your kiddos using technology? What role are you playing in the classroom? So what do you see? What would your perfect classroom look like? Not just, the students would be talking and we would be having fun. No, I would get into detail, like tell the story of everything you would see if you walked into your perfect ideal classroom.
I love that. When I think of that question, I think of the 3 Ps: pedagogy, pupil-driven. I know that's a stretch, right? And passion. So yeah. Pedagogy, you would see peer-reviewed research-based pedagogy such as think, pair, share, collaboration, creativity, students connecting with technology, communicating. I would be walking around the classroom. You wouldn't see me up front. I might be hard to find at first, but I'm in there. Exactly. But my students, it'd be pupil-driven or student-driven instruction. And you'd see my passion for teaching and learning and growing alongside my students. And then share stories about that. Like, what does that look like? Paint that picture and make it crystal clear to those interviewers. You're going to walk by my classroom and you're going to know that I am an educator of excellence and my students are learning and we're learning together, and it's fun and it's a place where they want to be. They feel respected. They feel there's a rapport between each other, their peers, and the teacher themselves. I think that's a great question, and it allows us to really get creative with our answers.
Yes, it does. It really does. And it kind of allows you to think about, what type of teacher you want to be. Like, what does excellent teaching look like to you? And you really describe it just like you would ask a student to write any kind of essay, about their five senses. Like, what are you going to see? What are you going to hear? What are the students going to be actually touching and doing? And that should not look like, you standing there lecturing and students sitting in rows at their desk quietly listening. It should be there should be conversation. Those walls should be covered. Students shouldn't be sitting down. They should be either sitting in groups, walking around, and you're doing the facilitating, not
I like that.
The teaching, right? So like, students are leaders in your classroom. And if you're really building that culture, they take on that leadership role. And so you will see students helping other students and explaining things to other students because they have been asked to take on that leadership role and they feel comfortable doing so. Right. So just anything that you can think of that you would hope would happen, in the perfect classroom, in your perfect classroom.
Right. I love that idea of being a facilitator. Sometimes teachers their job title is learning facilitator. And I think that's such a neat role that we get to take on as teachers.
Absolutely.
So let's jump into our next question. And I'm not sure if I'm going in the right order that we planned, but I'm just going to jump around the ones that I remember. I don't have a cheat sheet, but we did have 6 questions planned, or 5 and a bonus, sorry.
Yes,
so what about the question, this is a common first round interview question. So tell me about yourself. How do we approach this one?
Okay, so this is always a hard one. And, here is the thing. I want you to think back from when you're in college and you're sitting there and you're listening to a lecture. And I remember being in college and I had this history professor that was telling me the story of how some army conquered this area, and he was pretending like he was shooting a gun and he was running across the stage. And it was so animated. I was so fascinated by his story. But I've also had professors where they read notes and it's like bullet point lists, and I almost fall asleep in those lectures, right?
Yeah, we've all been there.
And so that is the tell me about yourself. That is where you are going to catch their attention. You really want to tell that story about what got you into that seat right there. How are you sitting in that seat right there? Well, it began when you were younger, right? You had this love of teaching, and then you decided to go to school for it. And what all did you do in school? What path led you to getting your teaching certification? And then how was student teaching? Where did you go for student teaching? What did you do? What did you feel like you really excelled at in student teaching? And then from there, how did you hear about this position being open, and into hopefully you've done some research about the school, into what do you really most interested about in working for that particular school, that exact school, right? So you really want to personalize it to the school. And so that, it involves doing research prior to, but what was it about that school that got you there? And it's kind of a fine line, right? Like, some people say to me, well, I don't want to brag. Well, you can say anything if you say it nicely, right? So you just got to figure out how to say those accomplishments that you've made. How can I say, that I'm really awesome at this without saying, hey, I'm really awesome at this, right? So you just got to practice those answers, and because you always want to come across as humble and likable and engaging. You definitely don't want to appear arrogant. So it really is kind of finding that way to talk about, your accomplishments and what you really excel at without sounding like you're, being arrogant, I guess.
Yeah, right. Overconfident or anything like that.
Exactly.
Because in an interview, you also want to be coachable. So that kind of goes into our next question of a very common first round interview question. Share about a strength that you have and a weakness or a point that you're working on, something like that. How could we approach a question like this and still, be a professional about our questions and not have a strength be a weakness? Come on. We all know what that means. Be real.
I'm a perfectionist. That's my
yes.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So,
really?
It doesn't sound like much of a weakness. So in this again, I'm going to say, you really want to tell your story about your strength. What is it that you're really good at? But give that example. Like you definitely don't want to give a bullet point list of all these things that are your strengths. Pick one thing that you're really good at. For me, I know that building relationships is a great strength of mine. And so I'm going to talk about building relationships, and I'm going to give a personal story about how I was able to build a relationship with a student who was, really cold and uninterested and very resistant to me. I want to give some type of proof to my strength. Okay. Mm-hmm. So when you get into your weakness, the weakness this is how you have to think of it. Self-awareness, action plan. Okay. So if you're talking about your weakness, for me, my definite weakness, and I was telling one of my clients this the other night, I'm not a details person. So I will find myself posting things and there will be an error in it. And I have looked over that thing 30 times and I just can't see it. And so, what I would say is, I know about myself that I'm not a details person. I recognize that. So in order to overcome that, I always find someone who is a details person to review my work before I post it, because I know that about myself, right? And so I may not be able to completely 100% get rid of it, but I can certainly do my very best to overcome it.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Being self-aware and then having an action plan of how you're working on that project. So for example, I'm not the most organized person. So when it comes to paper products, not my jam, but I am really good digitally. So some things that I do, because I don't want to lose that paper, because we've all been there. Oh, sorry, I lost your paper. Take a picture of it with an app like Office Lens. So I always have a digital copy. And I'm getting better with file folders. They're not my strength, but that's okay. So if you guys have any strengths or weaknesses that you'd like to drop down in our chat, we'd love to discuss them and help you craft that into a professional response when you're asked that question. And Candace, this is all based on our course that we created called Interview 101 Teacher Edition. If you're interested in finding out more, you can head on over to the interviewadvisor.com/get started. And you can find out more information about our course. I've also been dropping down in our chat a link to our freebie where it goes through resume hacks, 5 common interview questions, and some other bonus material for you guys. You guys can grab that over in our chat. But Candace, in our course, you share about, if you're asked the question, what's your greatest strength and weakness together, like as a whole question, instead of share a strength, you share a strength. Share a weakness, you share a weakness. If you're asked that question together, you share a really cool tip. Would you mind elaborating on that? Do you want to know what it is?
I would love to know what that is.
Okay. So that tip that you gave in the course was share your weakness first.
Yes.
There. Okay, you go. You say it so much better than I do.
Right. It's all about being humble, of course. You always want to appear to be a humble person, because who do you want to work with? Do you want to work with like that guy who thinks he knows everything, or the person who's always willing to learn and help out? So you definitely want to start with your weakness first, because then if you're showing an action plan, you're kind of building to a strength, right? So once you hit that strength, you're leading on a high note. You're also not just, ending on your weakness. You want them to remember the positive things, not the negative things about you, right?
Another common interview question is, tell me about your teaching philosophy. And just the word teaching philosophy can cause a little bit of a rapid heartbeat, some sweaty palms. What exactly is a teaching philosophy, and how do we explain it in a way that isn't lots of teacher jargon, but in a way that's approachable and practical?
So a teaching philosophy, I think a lot of people get overwhelmed, just like you said, when they hear this. It's like, what in the world is a teaching philosophy? Like, do I get a cliche? Is it like, is there this perfect answer that I'm supposed to say? And then I have to give this definition? No, a teaching philosophy is kind of like, what is your vision of your ideal classroom? Like your ideal teaching. So, and then you also want to kind of expand on that to show like, what does that look like? So for example, and I've said this before, like building relationships to me is one of the most important things in teaching. And so my philosophy is that students will respond to learning much more positively if they know that you care about them. So building those relationships are so essential to having a successful classroom. And what that would look like in my classroom is I would get to know my kids on an individual level, on a positive level, right at the beginning of the year. Because if I have a kid who's sleeping in class, if I know that kid and I truly understand where he comes from, what his parents do, what if he didn't sleep last night? You know, what if he slept or is homeless? So if I truly know my kids and I know all those things, I'm going to know how to handle that exact situation. And it's going to make my life easier because the kids are not going to rebel against you. So I guess I'm expanding on that a little too much, but just think about your teaching philosophy is like, what do you believe a good teacher has to do in order to have a successful classroom? You know, some people believe that they have to really know their curriculum back and forth in order to transfer that knowledge to students. And if that's your belief, that's great. What does that look like in your classroom? How do you transfer your knowledge to students? How do you show your passion for that particular subject? So there's no wrong answer to a teaching philosophy, but what you need to do is show what that looks like in your own classroom.
Yes. And we have a question here, but she shares, is it possible to add too much to this teaching philosophy question? I feel like I have so much to add here. How many points do you think I should go dig into?
So that's a great question. You know, in an interview, I've sat in many interviews, and those answers that people can really pack a lot into about, you know, less than a minute, 45 seconds to a minute, I'm always way more engaged. Like I said, you definitely want to tell a story to engage people. So you want to start a story and have a beginning, middle, end, and kind of leave it at that. You don't need to go into 2 or 3 stories or 4 or 5 examples or anything like that. You're going to tell your story. It shouldn't really be that long, because if it's engaging, the length is not really important, right? Yeah, I mean, I would just make sure, like I truly believe that if you're telling your answer in a story format and you have your beginning, middle, and end, you know, you really, like, if that makes sense, you're not going to get into too many points because it's just about one thing.
So when I think of teaching philosophy, I'm going to go back to those 3 Ps, thinking about your pedagogy. What does your classroom look like, feel like? What strategies, methods are you using? How do you differentiate instruction? How do you drive student-centered instruction? And thinking about your passion and your love for teaching, because that has to show. And friends, when you talk with a smile on your face, that just, your voice sounds different and it's more engaging. And I know it sounds super cheesy, but a smile really does go a long way when you're explaining your philosophy.
Proven fact, and this is in our course, you appear more attractive with one simple thing, a smile. So
it's so true.
It's so true. I mean, you've got to smile. You've got to show your enthusiasm about being there.
Right. Now, you don't have to stand on desks or anything like Dead Poet Society, but you have to show up for yourself. You have to show your excitement, your engagement for that specific posting. All right. I have another question. And it's about differentiated instruction. So how do we, if we get a question, something along the lines of, how have you adapted materials? How have you accommodated students? What types of differentiated instruction have you used? Something along those lines of, how are you meeting the needs of your students?
questions are really related to meeting their needs, right? So not all your students are going to be right on level. You're going to have some who are lower and you're going to have some who are higher as well. So differentiation is not just about, you know, modifying the curriculum to a lower level for those students who need it. Differentiation is about meeting the needs of the students. Well, how do you do that? You need to do a needs assessment. You always need to do a pre-assessment before you teach a big unit, because you don't want to sit and cover something for a week if most of the kids have mastered it already. You also don't want to skip over something if none of the kids, if they're supposed to know it, but they don't. So that's why pre-assessments are so valuable. Your needs assessment will tell you what types of learners are your students so that you can implement that into your activities, right? So if they're visual or if they're auditory or whatever. But it's just about getting to know your kids on an individual level and building those relationships, because, and I'm going to say this over and over again, because it really is the most valuable thing that you can do as a teacher is build relationships, because it's going to help you in all areas.
It really does. It helps in our next question, which is about classroom management. So if we're asked something along the lines of, what's your classroom management strategy, or what does classroom management look like in your specific class, in this posting or in this teaching placement? And if we're a student teacher, we might not have a lot of classroom management experience. Like, we are personally creating a classroom management strategy. We might have used something that our co-op has used. So how do we approach this?
Okay. So the first thing that I want to kind of go back to is in our course, we sort of, what I like about it is it's so valuable for student teachers who have very little classroom experience, because it's hard to come up with an answer if you've never been in that situation. And if you're truly listening to what I say and you're trying to tell a story about an experience and you don't have a frame of reference, that's really difficult. So one great thing about our course is we sort of share our experiences with you, and it gives you that frame of reference that you need in order to come up with a story in your head to tell that. So in reference to the question that you asked, any type of question that says, you know, how do you handle classroom management? How do you handle a disruptive student? How do you handle a disruptive parent, or a irate parent, or unhappy parent, or a coworker you have a conflict with? All of these boil down to one thing. They are behaviors, right? So again, I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound annoying, but all of these behavior related questions really go back to building relationships on a positive level at the beginning of the year, so that when you come into this type of conflict in any scenario, you've built that relationship. So number one, you have an understanding of why this behavior is happening, which will help you come up with a better solution, right? You know and understand where the student's coming from or where the parent's coming from. The other thing is you've established that you care about them. This is just a stepping stone, right? That you have to kind of get over. So if you've made a positive phone call to a parent at the beginning of the year, and then that student is getting in trouble, that's not the first time you're contacting them for a negative reason. You've already made a positive phone call. And when you do that, you're building rapport with both students and parents. And when kids know you care about them, they're not going to be perfect, because nobody is perfect, but they're certainly going to be a lot more engaged in your classroom, and they're going to want to please you. They're going to want to do the things you ask them. And if you know their interests and you're really building those relationships, they'll be interested in what you're teaching. So that will also minimize any disruptions that you may have in your classroom.
I think that's so important. I wish I knew that.
I know.
Going into interview season, like all those classroom management questions they boil down to building those relationships, maintaining those relationships, repairing them when needed,
Yes.
And it's something that just continues throughout that school year with your students. And it's all about those relationships. Everything else will come easier. Your content planning, your classroom management, all those things that relate to your teaching philosophy and what it looks like when the principal walks down the hall and looks into your classroom. So it's all about those relationships.
It really is. And, you know, I've worked with a lot of teachers who work till 7, 8 o'clock at night building these amazing lesson plans. But the problem is they're not catering to their students' needs. And so the students are not learning, they're not engaged, and they're still having behavior problems. And this all goes back to, you really have to put that as your focus so that when you're building your lessons, you know how to engage your students, you know what they're interested in, and it's going to, on the back end, just really help to eliminate a lot of those behaviors that you would see otherwise.
Right, absolutely. A colleague of mine, he shared that he taught honors, let's say honors social studies, and his colleague taught AP social studies. And one student signed up, a student signed up for AP, and then he ended up going to my colleague's honors class. And my colleague was like, why did you move to the honors class? You could have taken AP and gotten some college credit. And the student said, because you care to know my name and who and what I'm about. Yeah. I mean, it speaks volumes, right?
It really does. It really does. And
sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. Just simple things, just like a small interview tip. Like when you go in there and you meet everybody and you're leaving, if you can remember the names of anybody on that interview panel, thank you, Mrs. Smith. It was so nice to meet you. Just saying someone's name is so important. So
right.
That's a great interview tip. Remember those names as much as you can. And that's why in the research, you really want to research your administration, research your counselors, the team chairs or team leads or department chairs, so that when you do go in there, they're not foreign to you. It will help you remember.
Yes. And I remember now I was interviewing for my college position. It was a phone interview and then a virtual phone interview. And I remember I went and I took pictures of everybody who was on the panel. You know, I wasn't a super creeper, but I went to the website and I took a picture and put their name next to it. So whenever they got on the call, I was like, okay, here's the person. I'm talking to Connie, or I'm talking to Bob, or I'm talking to Bill. I was like, it really helped too, because you're already nervous enough, you know? Yeah. So we have another person who joined our live, Charles Williams, who was on a live, I'm going to say last week. Oh my gosh, if it was last week, time flies. And we were talking about interview tips as well. And he shared a fantastic gem, which was, if you can, visit the school and get to know the school before you interview. Brilliant, right?
Brilliant. And so what has really put like a hindrance on that is COVID.
Oh, yeah.
Because before, any client that I worked with, I would say, hey, go up to the school and deliver your resume and cover letter in person. And, you know, now a lot of schools are kind of weird about that. And so, you know, and so it's really, it's affected that personal touch that you have when you go in person and you do get to know people and you can kind of hang out with them a little bit. But yeah, that's super, super valuable.
Yes. And you all can also get a feel for the school as well. By going to visit, learning about different classrooms, learning about the vibe of the school. How does it make you feel? Could you imagine working here? What are some neat initiatives? Ask for an observation, especially if you are a senior and you're taking some coursework this semester. If you can get in, even ask to observe a virtual class or something. I mean, that speaks volumes of your attitude and your enthusiasm.
Exactly. Your growth mindset, you know.
Yes. And friends, if you want to check out that live, you can just scroll through my posts. You'll see me and Charles with our beautiful smiling faces. And we talk about that strategy a little bit more. Now, Candace, I put out on Instagram, I think it was last night, what questions do you have about interviews? And one that came, well, actually there were two, and one is actually from Samantha, who's just joined us. What are some good questions? What are some good questions to ask the interview panel?
Okay, this is my favorite part of the interview because this is really your chance to leave your lasting impression, right? So anytime, and this worked beautifully for my client a couple of nights ago, when you go into an interview, you want to engage the interview panel by getting them to talk, right? Because usually in an interview, you're doing all the talking. Well, that gets boring, okay? So you want to get them talking and get them involved in the interview. So at the end, ask them something personal. Ask them something that they've got to expand on. For example, you could say something like, what do you love most about working here? Or what has been the best experience you have had in this school so far? Or one great one that I love is, what advice do you have for a new teacher just coming in this year? So anything that will get them to start talking, and it gets them on a personal level. Number one, when people talk about themselves, it builds rapport with the person they're discussing, or with the person that they're speaking to. So you always want to try and get people talking, so that they're more engaged in the conversation. They're going to remember you because those questions are different. Not everybody asks that, you know? And so I think it's just important. Get them talking, ask them a question about them that's going to make them feel like you care.
Yes. And that's going to help you make your decision as well, because you are interviewing that school just as much as they're interviewing you.
Yeah.
And you want to find the right fit. We know you want a job. Everybody wants a job, but you can't be desperate for it. You got to find the right fit for you, because it's just going to benefit the school, the students, the students, yourself, the school, the district, that you're happy in this placement and you're happy here, and you can see yourself growing into leadership roles or taking on other challenges in the district and other roles as well. And then, so before we finish up, Frenzy, what we're discussing tonight is just a very small snippet of what we cover in our course called Interview 101, the Teacher Edition. You can find more information about that digital self-paced course. It walks you through from databases, because whenever I was searching for jobs, I thought everybody knew like where to find jobs, and I just had no idea, like, where are they actually posted?
Especially if you are someone looking out of state. It's so helpful, because me going to another state and looking for a job, they could do it differently. And so we have that all detailed for you. Exactly where to go if you want to look in this state, wherever, in your own state. We've got it all detailed for you.
So we go from where to even find the jobs to application, resume, cover letter, first round interview, second round interview, or a teaching interview, depending on how the district does it. And then how to follow up like the educator of excellence that you are. You can find more over on the interviewadvisor.com/get started. And our last question for tonight, Candace, when we are in an interview and we are asked a question, we have no idea how to answer. It sounds, we don't even know what they're asking. How do we answer this professionally and still have, we don't want to lie. We don't want to make something up. We want to be humble. We want to have a learner mindset. Yeah. So how do we approach a question that we go blank on? We're like, can you repeat the question?
Yes. So number one, that's typically people's go-to, right? They're like, oh, can you repeat that? Because you think you didn't understand it right, because you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about right now. So in my mind, it's always best to just be honest. You're going to build rapport that way anyways. You want to appear humble. And if you don't know something, it's always best to say that you don't know and that you need help understanding. So it's kind of the way you say it. So in my opinion, and I've been there. I have been there and been stumped by questions. And I had to just say, you know what, could you expand on that a little bit? Because I'm not quite understanding the question.
Right.
Something like that, to say, I need a little help here. Like, I'm struggling. And if you still don't understand it, just say, I'm going to do my best to answer this, but I'm not sure it's exactly what you're looking for. And then go in and just answer it the best way that you can. You definitely don't want to say, I have no idea, right?
Right.
You want to show that you're willing to search for this answer and find something that will work. You want to do it in a diplomatic way, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's always okay to just be honest about it, because I guarantee you those people have been in your position before. They got there because they got through an interview or many interviews. And so they're going to understand that maybe you don't fully understand the question, and maybe they've been there. So just be honest about it. Say it in a diplomatic way. Ask them to repeat the question. Ask them to expand on the question if they don't mind, or give an example of what they're looking for, something like that.
I think those are excellent. And as you go into your response with what you think the question is asking, sometimes this happened to me in an interview where I kind of understood what they were saying, so I answered the best that I could. And then a person on the panel said, so for example, and then they gave an example, and then I was able to expand much more deeply about that topic because I understood the question better. And sometimes, as a podcaster, I know sometimes my questions, they don't come out quite right. So sometimes, I know, it's like, so sometimes it's also in the phrasing, asking to repeat, asking to expand. Can you give an example? Yes. And just be honest. Yeah. And if the question is like an area in which you're not very familiar with, I would say something along the lines of, I'm willing to learn more about that specific curriculum, or I'm going to be researching that specific strategy, and actually do it and follow up with that thank you note.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Yeah. I did a lot of research on, blank, and I just want you to know that I'm super excited about blah, 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 or whatever. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a great way to personalize that thank you note so that they will, number one, remember you, and you're showing them that you care.
Right. Exactly. And to find out more about our course, you can head on over to theinterviewadvisor.com/get started. It's a work at your own pace digital course. Thanks so much for stopping by, and maybe we'll see you next week. Have a great Wednesday. Bye for now.
And there you have it, Edu-Magicians. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. For more Edu Magic, check out sfessage.com and follow Dr. Sam on Twitter and Instagram @sfessage. Until next time, you have the Edu Magic within you.